Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. This is Kyla speaking, and we have Kristen, Nutritional Revolution practitioner, here with us today. You want to say hi, Kristen?
Hello.
And we got Nia in the background taking notes. And then we have some really cool guests for you guys today. We have Campfire Endurance Coaching coaches here with us today. We have Chris Bagg, professional triathlon coach. He was also a pro triathlete himself. He spent 2 decades in the sport racing, half and full Ironman distances. And then to top it off, he also apparently does gravel because he took 22nd place overall at Unbound. So he's doing that. He's got his USAT level 2. And he is, of course, the co-founder of Campfire Endurance. And then we have Molly Balfe with us today as well, co-owner to Campfire as well. And she also has her USAT level 2 and her master's from Columbia in public health. And we're going to dive into all things coaching, their nutrition experience, working with athletes. But first, welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're excited. Why don't we kind of start with how did you guys get into coaching athletes? I know it's probably a long story, but feel free to start wherever.
Molly, you go first.
Okay. So I started working as a coach almost 20 years ago now. I had been working with swimmers mostly. And then as I started getting into triathlon, I started working with triathletes in New York City, in and around New York City. And while I was there, I was going to school and getting my master's in public health. And I started working with a program called Coach Across America that placed coaches in as part of AmeriCorps volunteerships. And so I had a very strange 1-year-long swim club that was part of the school day at PS 125 in Morningside Heights. And we had a group of swimmers who would show up like 3 days a week and participate in a pretty wild array of swim events.
Awesome.
And and it was great. And I started to see the impact that sport participation really has on young people.
Yeah.
And I thought, why not bring this to grownups too? So that's really what led me here.
Yes.
That's cool.
That is very neat. And Chris?
Yeah, I've kind of been in and out of education my whole life. And I've been working as a high school teacher, kind of when I started getting into triathlon in the early aughts. Around 2008, 2009 was when I was kind of starting to make the shift from being a teacher to being a full-time athlete. And I sold a set of wheels to a guy in Australia, and they were tubular wheels, which are kind of going out of fashion, but they're still out there. Yeah. And he sent me an email being like, I have to glue the tires to these things. And I think I sent him back like a 6-page email, walking him through how to glue tubulars. And he was like, you seem like you know a lot about this. And I was like, I don't know. I've done it for a few years. And he said he was looking for a coach. And so Shane Harrison from Canberra, Australia was my very first athlete. And
cool.
Just started adding coaches from there, adding athletes from there, and then eventually added some other coaches. And I am now a gym teacher for adults.
Cool. That's the best. Awesome. And I know you had a recent name change, right? It was solely you, Chris, right? And then transferred to, obviously now Molly's part of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think maybe some people are familiar with the prior name.
Yeah. So everybody out there, when you start your businesses, don't put your name in the business. Just don't do it. You're going to think it's a good idea. You're going to be like, this is the best way to get known. Oh my God, it's terrible. I'm so relieved that we have moved away from Chris Bagg Coaching Group. And it's nice to have a name that I feel like more reflects who we are. There's actually some words in the title that sort of say what it is that we do. Molly is a 50-50 owner of this company, and her name is not Chris Bagg, and it just wasn't fair. And it was confusing for our clients. It was confusing for our coaches. And I think in general, it was hurting us a lot more than it was helping us. And so it took a while. Like, we knew that we had to do this probably about 2 or 3 years ago. And it took a long time of figuring out how to do it and then putting all those pieces in place. And then basically just holding our breath and doing it.
Yes.
And how did you come up with the name?
Molly gets to tell this one.
We hated it the least of all of the.
Oh my gosh.
And eventually we gave ourselves a deadline, and we were like, after this date, we have to pick a name. Like, it is time. And it was time to like put the name on kits and start like getting our name out to our partners and sponsors. And we had like looked around in the endurance space, and there were a lot of things that we knew we didn't want to do. Like, we didn't want to have like a really aggressive, like anvil or something. Sorry out there probably isn't anvil coaching. So we also didn't want to be too touchy-feely, because I think we do have somewhat of a reputation for like connection first and like empathy and all that stuff, which we believe in. But like we really do also believe in working with athletes who want to see success and to see improvement. And we wanted to make sure that we were speaking to that as well. And so for us, Campfire was something that spoke to like bringing people together in like a light and dark places and survival and all of the things that we love, and storytelling, the things that really make us happy and like are part of like the temples of our business. So yeah, that eventually was the one that we ended up going with. We did test it a little bit. It came back mixed, but we went with it anyway.
There you go.
Yeah,
I think it's good because you guys really have developed, your coaching group has a sense of community. You know, especially being from the area, I see that, you know, I see people in your kits, and I follow some of your athletes on Instagram, and they're all about it. And I just think it's wonderful, because I think that that's part of an experience that you should have as an athlete. You put so much time and effort into sport, and it can be so like singularly focused, and you can spend a lot of time working out on your own. So it's good to have that community, and you guys have done a great job with that.
That's great.
We're happy to hear that is getting communicated, because you never know, like, you know, you're like, well, this is what we hope we're saying. And yeah, I mean, triathlon is such a lonely, solitary sport.
Totally.
It is less about like actual physical ability and more about schedule management. And you just spend so much time alone, going to workouts alone, swimming alone, cycling alone. And yeah, we really want to make sure that people don't forget that, you know, that this is a part of a healthy and happy lifestyle. And yeah, sure, it's awesome to go fast, and it's great to get faster. And a lot of people have important goals, and that's primarily what we do. But my God, you cannot lose sight of the other two parts of your existence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, talking about the community piece, you mentioned your first client was out of Australia. It sounds like you probably have clients that aren't necessarily all located right by you. How does something like community, how do you keep community with these people that are on the other side of the globe?
It's a great question. Molly, you want to talk a little bit about like the endurance school and like some of the other ways that we've kind of done stuff like that?
For a second, I had forgotten about the endurance school. That's how far we've gotten with this. But I mean, the big answer is like, you're looking at it like Zoom. It has been a huge thing for our business. But the endurance school was when the pandemic started, and we were, you know, we already had athletes that were geographically dispersed. You know, we had them throughout the world technically, but we had not figured out that we could use this software to communicate with them and to like actually get to see them. Most of our calls were being done over the phone, and we were monitoring things through like Training Peaks. But we, when the pandemic started, we started to do a series on Twitch, or we started a channel on Twitch that, if you don't know about Twitch, it's awesome. It's like a way to get your television show out into the world, the internet, and let people engage with it. But yeah, so we started working on the endurance school is what we called it. And we had a gym for a very small amount of time, which closed, very quickly. And we moved all of our classes online. So initially we tried to connect with our athletes by offering something like 15 like opportunities to engage with us in class every week. And that fire burnt real bright, and and we were exhausted by the end of that. And we kind of cut that down and eventually ended up with over a year, I think, maybe a year and a half of pretty consistent programming where we were doing interviews with community members similar to this format, and then doing some like bike rides with the Sufferfest, and we did a group Zwift ride and a strength series and morning routine, and it gave people a chance to engage with us in a way that was sort of new for us. But I think a lot of what we have right now is built off of the work that we did at that point.
Yeah, that's awesome. So with something like that, like, I saw obviously you guys have additional coaches that you guys are bringing on and kind of training. And I would imagine that's because your reach is growing and your probably client load is growing. Do you guys have a cap for yourself where you can only manage so many clients before you need to pass them off to somebody else kind of thing? Or how does that work for you guys?
Totally. Yeah. We because the thing that we do is really like high touch one-to-one coaching.
Yeah.
Like we've tried training plans before. It generally doesn't work for us. I know some places it really works, but it's just not what we're good at. As people that have been in the education world our entire lives, like we just end up needing to talk to our athletes. So we, like, all of the coaches, we aim for 15. Like that's the maximum. Like a lot of coaching companies, like you usually end up a little overbooked, so like Molly and I are both like 16, 17. One of our coaches, Donna, who's the only thing she does is coach. So it's a little easier. She's like 18, 19. But when you get to the point where you can't rattle off every athlete that you're working with in 30 seconds, that's too many athletes.
Yeah.
And if because that just means that you don't have the space in your brain for caring about that person really. And so, and we've had a few false starts with other coaches and carrying employees and contractors. I'm sure your business is a learning experience for you as well.
Yes.
Right. The path to success is paved with failure, right? And with the Coach Accelerator, it does seem to be going pretty well.
Awesome.
And for those coaches, we keep their limit is kind of 6 to 7. Because all of our Coach Accelerators are fantastic coaches, but they are newer to this. And so we really want to make it sustainable for them and give them something to grow towards. Hopefully the Coach Accelerator is a 12-month program. We have these kind of coaches in training, they get paid. But the hope is that they will grow into employees of the company eventually.
Yeah. Awesome.
How many coaches do you have right now?
We have 3 Coach Accelerators, and then the employee coaches are me and Molly and Donna. So 6 coaches all told.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
That's awesome.
And do you all, because I know, don't you offer like specific, Chris, I know, do you coach some just bike racers, correct? Or, so you're able to coach like just runners and okay, perfect.
Yeah, I've got some just cyclists. Molly has done a bunch of like just swimmers, and things like that. So yeah, we do have single sport athletes, and then the rate for our single sport athletes is obviously a little lower, just because it's a little simpler, not easier.
Yeah.
Right. That kind of brings me to one of the questions we got from our audience, which was around training camps. And you guys, I know maybe I'd be curious, how did COVID affect your training camps? Did they have to be put on hold? Were they virtual? What happened with that?
COVID really affected my training camp this year because I got COVID right when we were supposed to have camp. So I got stuck in it. Yeah, it was a real bummer. But so the first year that we had our camp canceled, and, our Bend camp was actually, this is kind of, it started, we had Tucson camp in like February or March, I think. And then we had heard a little bit about maybe this COVID thing was going to be real. And then by May, which was our Bend camp, the whole world had changed. We were like, okay. And Bend Camp is a huge event for us every year, not only like as part of our business, but it's also a way that we're rejuvenated as coaches, a way for us to connect with our athletes. We get a ton of community involvement from it. And so we were really sad to miss out on camp, and we wanted to be able to connect with people. And connection was really lacking at that point. People were feeling isolated and they were training alone and racing alone. And so we had a virtual camp which sounds weird, but actually worked out really well.
Awesome.
We ended up getting like almost 100 people, I think, sign up.
That's great. Wow.
We had a lot of, I don't remember, that number may have been affected by history at this point, but we had a bunch of people sign up. We had people support us like in ways that we had not even asked for. Came to the training events, like went out in the world and like took pictures, participated. We had the athletes table create meal plans for people, and they like cooked the recipes and took pictures of them, and like ended up being awesome. It wasn't
great.
The same, but it was something new and interesting. And then we had a very small camp the year after. And then this year's camp, Chris very kindly operated on his own while I was coughing in the Holiday Inn Express, Albuquerque.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
You guys have a bend camp this past year?
Yep.
Yeah, we did.
Awesome. And so one of the questions we got from the audience was, can any athlete attend your camp without having an active coaching connection?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Our sort of best camps are when we get kind of a 50-50 split of Campfire athletes and non-Campfire athletes.
Yeah.
Because then it's just, we're a little less of an echo chamber that way. And other people kind of get to come in and be like, oh, wow, this is a fun group. They take their training seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. Which, my God, that is a real problem in triathlon.
Awesome. And so with the camps, are they like purely triathlon focused, or could someone who's just strictly a cyclist or strictly a runner attend?
They're probably pretty multi-sport focused. We definitely have people who we've made accommodations for because, they're injured and not running right now. And we've made it work for people who need to be able to like miss out on one of the sports.
Yeah.
That said, we are definitely kicking around some gravel camp ideas, and we do, Chris has a long experience in cyclocross, which I know is very, very popular. So I think there are some opportunities that will be more exciting for somebody who's going to be sport specific. And we also have swim camps for people who are just looking to work on their swim. Yeah, a little bit lower lift.
That's great. And kind of talking about that, like athletes coming in, is there any common things, whether it's from a training perspective or if there's a nutrition focus? I'm curious if you guys see it, but are there common areas you see athletes coming to you struggling with when they first start?
Definitely nutrition.
They're not alone.
No, I mean, it's such a, I mean, I get it, right? Like usually the quantities of just like fluid that like is necessary to actually do these sports effectively. Getting people to understand that change, because it's a tough one, because athletes believe, understandably, that these events are difficult. And so they go out and they don't drink enough and they feel terrible. And they're like, this is exactly how I'm supposed to feel. And you're like, oh, you could feel so much better.
I know. I know.
And getting them to understand that is always difficult. What we've done in the past at camps that has been successful, because maybe you guys bump into this in your own coaching and whatnot. After a little while, your athletes are like, yeah, sure, I know that like I pay you and I've hired you and I trust you, but I don't listen to you anymore. We would Skype in somebody to basically like the night before our biggest ride and basically yell at the campers to be like, all of you need to drink at least 9 bottles tomorrow on your, and like the campers would just be like, what the heck? And then they would do it and all of them would come back to the house and be like, I have never felt so good on a ride before. My God. And so, I mean, like that's, nutrition is a big one. Some of the other things that we are constantly sort of battling some headwinds against are, especially these days, the continuing like quantification of everything, which is an important part of learning how to do something. But it's just sort of taken over in endurance sports, where like, if you can't measure it, it's not important. And that's, and that, I mean, we really think that that's a quick way to get worse at the sport. is just by focusing on numbers all the time.
Yeah.
That isn't to say that we only focus 100% on feel. That is also a good way to get bad at the sport quickly. But yeah, getting people to understand that it is a multi-factor approach of nutrition and training and resting and the ways that you do it. And that if you just do everything one way, all the way to the hilt, it's only going to work for a little while.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Do you guys do any sweat testing or measurement of that kind of stuff with your clients?
Yeah, we do. We certainly do sweat rate testing with our clients. We understand, how heavy of a sweater they are. And then we have been working with precision hydration with Rappi locally on sodium content in sweat. I think there's a huge difference out there for our athletes. So so Chris and I actually did that together first before we did that with our athletes, and they were like, "Molly, you're a bottle of Gatorade, like, congratulations." But Chris was not, like, he a heavy sweater and a saltier sweater. So like for his nutrition plan, that's going to make a big difference, especially since a lot of like the gravel races are very hot. That's going to make, like, Chris definitely needs to down a lot of sports drink while he's out on his bike. And I have a little bit more room, but still need to down a lot of sports drink while I'm out on my bike.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and it's so many athletes, including myself before I got into this career, overlook hydration. Like you think it's all like, I've bonked several races, I will admit. And I always would blame it on food when I look back and I'm like, I think I carried 2 bottles on my bike for that 90-mile race in the heat. And then I just be like, oh, it's fine. I'm a camel. I don't need to drink that much. And then I look at, so it's such an overlooked issue that so many athletes don't know about. So I think it's so great as coaches that you're, educating your athletes, because really it's a performance enhancer that is pretty easy, easy watts, 3 watts here, just drink.
Healthy,
right? Yeah, I mean, you can fix a calorie deficit in 10 minutes. That's an easy fix. You can even fool your body into thinking calories are on the way. But Molly has a great saying that you can't uncook a turkey. And my God, once you're dehydrated, like you're not getting, you can't get back. Like, even like effective hydration is a limited dehydration. There's just no way to go out and do these events and not be net negative a little bit. Just trying to minimize as much that negative as possible. And so many athletes like Kristen, just have that same idea of like, oh, like, I don't think I need this as much. And it's a bummer, because by not drinking, you're training your body to go in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Until you can't pedal your legs anymore.
Right. Not the direction you want to go.
No.
It seems like with a lot of the sweat testing too, what we're starting to see with our athletes is that it is so individual. We can have men and women that are sweating exactly the same. And then we could have women that are sweating excessively more than some of our male clients, and just the variation too between temperature environments. I mean, we were testing with one of our athletes and he did the exact same run, same pace. But he did it in, I think it was like 65 degrees. And then he did it again in 75 degrees. And he went from 40 ounces an hour loss to 80 ounces. And he doubled his sweat loss in 10-degree increase. So to know that and have that ammo, but then also be able to train to like try and minimize those fluid losses in that environment is so important. And then we have some of our female athletes and they're losing like 20 ounces an hour and, the same temperature. So knowing what your needs are is hugely beneficial. So I love that. Kind of on that note,
I'd love to get one last thing in there on that. This is Chris's little like, oh my God, even despite large variation between athletes and whatnot, I can never like go below a bottle an hour for recommendations.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, even if you do the test and you come back and that athlete is only losing, 20 ounces of fluid an hour, I'm going to be like, look, like you might forget, you don't need a lot of water, or you don't need a lot of fluid, so you might just miss it. Please, please, please make sure that every hour, at least about like 24 ounces is going in.
Yeah.
That's not going to hurt your performance. And and so I just like, I would love there to be a general floor for hydration of around 3/4 liter an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. It is pretty incredible, the losses too, and different athletes. But yeah, I think that's a good baseline place to be, for someone. Cause I think too, our runners, honestly, we notice it the most. Is like they just do not like drinking, like ever. Carrying bottles is not going to happen. They don't want to do it. So it's really hard to get some of our, strictly runners to do that and start increasing fluid intake. But definitely something that needs to be done to help with the performance for sure.
Yes.
So kind of on that note, talking about testing, you mentioned before we started recording, you guys utilize something called, I think you said WKO5. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it pretty much mines an athlete's power data and gives us all of the information from all of their bike rides that they use power for. It's not, obviously, if you don't have a power meter, the data that you're going to get from it is going to be different. Or if you're riding a bike that doesn't have a power meter, like gravel, but like when I ride my gravel bike, there's not power information from that. But anything that does include power, WKO puts into a system that gives us a ton of ability to analyze the data and recognize when some trends are occurring. So whether that is a trend in, an increase in FTP or an increase in an athlete's time to exhaustion at FTP, like there are things that we can monitor for how successful we're being as coaches, and also keep an eye on for some of our athletes. So like, it's really helpful when you get that athlete who comes back and they're like, I trained mostly by heart rate, but for years before I got a power meter. And so there are a ton of races that I did where I was like, I don't understand. Like my heart rate was where it's supposed to be. Like what happened when I went out and rode my bike and then I couldn't run as well afterwards. And it's really helpful to be able to work with an athlete and be like, okay, well, like your heart rate was about where it was supposed to be, but you spent 20 minutes above the FTP on a like bike ride that you should not have spent any minutes above FTP. Like it's a really good, like this is what's happening out there, and helps to quantify some of that information and make it more usable for athletes. And yeah, I've found it very helpful, and feel like it's one of those things that like I keep learning more about every time I find an issue that it can highlight. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is so great.
Yeah. It's cool data.
Yeah,
it's really cool. I played around with it. It's just, that's what's so cool about the bike and the power meter. It's just so quantifiable, like the numbers are there. With running, it's a little different, and I know nothing about swimming, so I can't speak for that, but the bike is just so cool. If you have a power meter, all the data that you can get and how the athlete is progressing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it really helps us. It's an individualization tool, because I think most triathletes and triathlon coaches out there are going to be familiar with the, God, I hope by now, falling out of favor 20 minutes minus 5% test, which is not a good test. It's like, it doesn't even really get you in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Most athletes, when they come to cycling, don't even know how to pace a 20-minute effort. It's just too long, and you get bad data. And then you have to send this poor athlete who just like wrung themselves out and be like, sorry, we got to do this again. And
it's exhausting. To go out and do that again, you've got to wait quite a bit of time to let your body recover, because that'll take it out of you. Yeah,
especially if it's a new athlete. Like if it's an athlete that doesn't have a ton of aerobic capacity or aerobic conditioning, and you just made them do like the hardest bike ride of the year, you got to give it a few weeks for them to be able to recover from that. And what's nice about WKO is that it suggests different time ranges for testing that sort of come up with a model that then allow us, like Molly was saying, to monitor development. We pretty much at the beginning of the year, if an athlete is using power, we'll throw the very basic raft of tests at them. We'll get a sprint, we'll get a 1 minute, we'll get a 5 minute, we'll get a 20 minute. if it's like a pursuit style cyclist, we might, or like a sprinter, we might get a 30-minute, but that's sort of an edge casey there. And then what's really nice about WKO is we don't really have to do those tests again. We just kind of keep the model populated by throwing some maximum efforts at them throughout the year. Cyclists, it's really easy because once they start racing, that's their test.
Yeah.
Like they're testing every time they go race. Triathletes a little different because triathletes don't necessarily go and do max efforts unless you've got like a draft legal sprinter or somebody who's doing a lot of Olympic distance races. So every 8 to 12 weeks, our athletes will get a little like the weirdest workout ever. Like, we want you to go and ride more than 196 watts for 33 minutes and 42 seconds. What? And we're like, look, just ride as hard as you can for 34 minutes.
Can't do that,
take care
Chris.
of it.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
And it's a very helpful tool. It's a nice way to really get a sense of what's happening with the athlete.
That is nice. And when you have athletes come to you guys, do you have a different approach if the person maybe is a little bit more advanced, a little bit more competitive versus someone who's maybe never had a coach before and is training for their first race?
Yeah, I think those two athletes are probably on a different point in their like coach-athlete relationship journey. Our goal is to get people to feel like they are in charge of their training and racing, and like they are the people who own that process. And so ideally, Chris or I or any of our coaches would end up being a consultant and somebody to give some feedback and a partner in all of this. But for newer athletes, there are things that, they need to learn skills, and they need to learn to trust their bodies, and they need to learn to interpret the data. So we do end up working more, prescriptively, I guess, with some newer athletes. And then if an athlete has been in the sport for a while, they typically have a lot better idea of what it is that they need, how they're feeling, when they need to rest, when they need to work hard, and how they need to feel going into a race. So their feedback is really critical, and it's critical from both athletes probably, but for an athlete who's been doing this for a while, the role just shifts a little bit to be more support than guide.
Awesome. And with something like that, like, it makes me think, like racing at altitude. Do you guys do it could be a newbie athlete versus more of a competitive, but how do you guys approach, what kind of prep is done, or is there prep done for somebody going to race at some significant altitude that they've never been exposed to before?
Get there a month ahead of time.
Just go get there a month ahead of time. Yeah.
Easy. Just go a month ahead.
I can say one thing don't do is don't go, if you can't go a month ahead of time or 3 weeks ahead of time, do not go a week ahead of time. Oh my gosh, the number of people who are like, yeah, I'm going to get there a week ahead of time. I'm going to get acclimated. I'm going to be like, great, on race day, you are going to be the worst that you're going to be.
Yeah.
And altitude's tough. These days, there has been some really good science and some literature out there about using heat training to develop an athlete's ability at altitude, which makes sense because you're expanding somebody's plasma volume, which is going to help keep your heart rate slightly down at altitude. But really, if you're going to go race at altitude and you don't live at altitude, and, say it's like a worst case scenario, like an athlete is like, I'm going to go do a race at altitude in February and I live in Michigan. You're like, okay, we can do some heat preparation, but really the coaching then is like, look, you have to take it really easy in the race. Like, I know that's going to be a big adjustment, but you need to dial it back, probably 5 to 15%. And if you're in a bike race, you have to be really have to have the leash really tight. And you just can't go over that line too many times because you can't uncook a turkey.
Right.
This metaphor works across conditions.
All applications.
So you'll end up pushing your bike up the last hill.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. for durability in heat and at altitude, fitness really helps. So like being able to have a conversation with an athlete about like, this is not a race to roll up to the start line feeling like it's my B race, like I'm just going to go and race at altitude for a half Ironman, but I'm training for the full. It's like, no, take this race seriously. Fitness really helps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if they can't go a month ahead of time and we don't want them going a week ahead of time, do you suggest like a couple of days ahead of time at the very least, or?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think at that point we're talking about like, just do what you would normally do.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's the other thing that we really try to do with any kind of race is like, we don't want the last week or the last few days to be different. Like it's got to just be another workout. And there's nothing special about it. Like, sure, yeah, we're gonna do some dietary stuff at the end. But we are talking about polish. Like all of these little things about like what day do you go and what not, like what do you eat in the last few days, like you can really simplify it. And what Molly just said is the big, like 99% of it is like, do your training, do your preparation, like do everything possible to make it so when you walk out onto the course on race day, you're like, oh, this is just a workout. This is a long day, and I don't need to do anything special about it.
Yeah. I think you just opened up a good segue to what to eat leading up to a race and your tactics, Chris. We got a question from our audience. He said I could say his name. So on Instagram @VeloJosh says, tell us about #pancake doping.
I'm kind of surprised that we didn't get apple doping as well, which is the other thing that we often hear a lot about.
I haven't heard that one.
Both of these are stolen from Jesse Kropelnicki at QT2 Systems. These are Tim Snow, who is now the general director at QT2, was my coach for the last few years of my career. Nice. But I started working on a nutritional basis with Jesse in 2011. And I've been having a lot of the very normal problems that athletes do when they make a switch from half iron racing to full iron racing. All the classic assumptions that like, oh, it's just twice the distance. No, it's not. Yes, objectively, it is twice the distance. Subjectively, it's 4 times more hard in terms of like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Jesse and I had like talked for a bunch. We did some dietary recall. And then he sent me what seemed like just the craziest plan. And just like any athlete, I was like, oh my God, this is a lot of food. Yeah. And then it worked. Like it worked really, really well. I had the best race probably of my career of like, awesome, with that first time, because like the first time you do everything right. You like tick all the boxes. And so the pancake doping, there's been a good amount of research that like, yes, you should eat some additional carbohydrates before your endurance events. You do not or should not eat 2 plates of pasta the night before your race. You get the same amount of like muscular glycogen and liver glycogen as long as you get in some additional carbohydrate in the like 24 to 36 hours before the race. So if it's the same, if it doesn't matter, then we want to get it in as early as possible. Because if we don't get it in as early as possible, you guys are nutritionists, so I'm sure we can talk about poop. That's what you do.
Yeah.
that is 50% of your job is talking about poop.
Yes.
If you do have that massive load of pasta the night before a long distance endurance race, you are going to have some gastrointestinal problems. Yeah. So what Jesse eventually evolved was you start your carbohydrate load 2 days before the Ironman. You have a big lunch 2 days out. Jesse I don't know if you guys know Jesse, he is a very practical person. He once, after a race, deadpan, like the race didn't go well, just came up to me and was like, I told him what happened. He was like, oh, Chris, you're not good enough to take risks like that.
Oh no.
Awesome.
Just blunt.
Just love it. And so he was like, yeah, 2 days before a race, go to a Subway. get a 12-inch sub and chips. And I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, it's like, this doesn't sound like sound nutritional advice. And he was like, yeah, it's not a great product, but there is a Subway in every single race town
Yeah.
in the world.
Right.
It's true. Yeah.
Big dinner that night, just like what you would sort of basically think is like a carbohydrate heavy meal.
Mhm.
And then the day before the race, you go to a Denny's again. Not really a place that I'm frequenting outside of race
Right.
weekends. You order a custom Grand Slam with double pancakes, eggs, hash browns, and toast.
Wow. Yeah.
The hash browns are critical.
It's a horrifying amount of food. Like if you have two people racing, the table is covered in food. And it sounds like a lot, but then Jesse does have some sensible things where he's like, look, eat until you are full. Do not eat until you are in pain.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like, because he's working with triathletes who are mostly OCD and are like, well, you said eat all this food. No, you just eat until you're full. And then you start kind of tapering the food throughout the day.
Yeah.
You make sure that your sodium, your sodium intake is high enough, but not too high.
Mm-hmm.
And then dinner was always like a cup of cooked rice and a chicken breast. And that's
nice.
It.
Yeah.
like if you're going to bed slightly hungry the night before a big event, you've done it right. That's not a problem. That means that because you're going to eat breakfast to get your glycogen load back up. But that largely means that the food has been absorbed into your system and that your colon is mostly empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got that glycogen stored because typically you're not expending it. Hopefully you're not, working out a ton the few days before the race either. So you're storing those pancakes. I think that's the number one thing I notice. I work with a lot of runners is before they start working with me, they do the huge pasta meal the night before the marathon. And then they wake up, they're so full from this pasta that they don't eat enough prior to the race. And so that's one thing when I do their meal plans, they're like, wait, you have me doing like a plain chicken breast, some carrots, and like a cup and a half of rice the night before a long runner race. And I'm like, absolutely. That's all you need.
Yeah.
So
Molly, you want to tell them about apple doping?
Apple doping. That's our very breakfast. It is a varying quantity of applesauce, unsweetened applesauce, critical depending on the body size of the athlete, and a little bit on tolerance, but not too much. And a scoop of whey protein powder and a banana, all cut up into a bowl and then mixed all together. And we usually give that to people a bottle of sports drink. And coffee if they drink it. But it's already pre-digested. It's like relatively low glycemic. Like it is going to replenish those glycogen stores and remove itself from your life. And that's the goal. And hopefully enough water in it to leave you without feeling like really depleted from the breakfast that you just ate. Chris always describes eating oatmeal for breakfast and then showing up at the start line kind of snoozy, this is a really sustainable energy. I find that people tend to tolerate it really well once they get past the fact that it's not that good,
And this is race morning breakfast, you're saying? Yeah.
Not here for the snacks. Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of my
other things on your mind on race morning anyway, rather than sitting down to a tasty meal.
Exactly.
Yes. One of the athletes I started working with recently, he's a pro triathlete in Olympic distance, and he's traveling around twice a month to race right now. And he told me what his carb loading protocol is. And it's basically loads of white rice, soy sauce, and then Coke, because he can get that because he's going to Spain and all over. And that's what's been working obviously really well for him. I mean, but it's the different things you hear people eating. But the applesauce one, I like that. I hadn't heard of that before. That's awesome. I want to be mindful of your guys' time because we are getting close, but I'd love to just touch on briefly both your guys' maybe nutrition experiences over your guys' athletic careers. And if you guys have had any, obviously the pancake doping sounds like was an eye opener for Chris, but any other things you guys noticed or knew kind of were good changes you made from a nutrition or hydration perspective?
I mean, I think my story is probably pretty close to a lot of people who come to this sport. I had grown up a competitive swimmer. I swam USS, and, you know, I went through high school swimming and just kind of thought that I was like, I'm just one of those people who can like eat whatever I want to. And then I got to college and I stopped swimming, and I was like, no, I'm not. So I had a good like 6 or 7 years maybe where I just wasn't training consistently, and because of that I had started eating more like somebody who was dieting, like somebody who I'd really taken down my like calorie intake, and I just wasn't fueled for exercise, and I'd never been a runner. And so when I started running, I was like, this is terrible, but it also feels really bad.
Yeah.
And I think it was when I started doing longer distance races. So when I went from Olympic to half Ironman, especially, I just felt like trash all the time. And I think I see this with a lot of the athletes that I get who have come from like more of a weight loss background with nutrition than a background. It is really hard, I think, to make that leap from to how much you really need to eat to not only sustain yourself but to perform well. And I think I see a lot of people who are falling into that category of just not eating enough, and like because of that their bodies start to like really hold on to fat, especially and they're just not they're not fueling their training, they're not getting stronger, they're getting hurt and run down and tired. And then they come to like a camp of ours or something and they eat their faces off for a week. I feel amazing. So that was how much you have to eat was definitely the thing
that's super common. We see that with a lot of our athletes coming in. I would say probably like 95% of the athletes coming to us are under eating for what they're doing, without a doubt.
Sure.
And absolutely. Primarily from carbohydrates, which is like the main fuel source.
And they're like, I feel amazing. Like, yes, it's very easy.
Yes.
I have a junior who's racing at USAT Nationals this week who I just started working with, and he was like, well, I usually try to stay away from sugar on race week. I'm like, why?
Oh no. Yeah, shoot. Yeah. That's a bummer. I don't know if it's the keto thing that's blowing up right now, but the carb fear is very real.
We're in such a carb phobic period. The keto thing, so many athletes asking about it over the past years that I was like, fine. And I did it for 12 weeks in the winter of 2017, and it's awful.
I can't imagine with how active you are.
I mean, I could go on long rides. I could not twist the throttle. There was just a governor at 80% where it was like, no, you can't do this.
Your body doesn't have that quick access to ATP, really.
It's like we can get there eventually. But this takes, hold on.
Shoot.
For me, I don't know, like, I guess the big change for me was starting to work with Jesse, and the biggest takeaway with working with him was that every workout is an opportunity to practice something new, or if you have something that seems to be working, to train your body to absorb more of it. The people who do better at these races are the people who can handle more fuel. Like I hate boiling things down to stuff like that. You know, generally it's more nuanced and it depends. There's a few things where that's just not true. You know, like training works. Like that's one where I'm like, I'll go out on a limb on that one. But the other one is like the more food that an athlete can safely accommodate, the faster and more successful they'll be. And really learning that from Jesse was amazing. He was like, every single swim should have a bottle of sports drink on deck with you, and you should finish it. You should finish it by the end of the workout, even if it's an easy swim. He's like, you are training your body to process carbohydrate. Why in the world are you missing that opportunity?
Yes, 100% agree. That is like, I was trying to explain that to one of my athletes the other day because they were coming from a low carb background, and there was some research published, I think it was probably like 6 years ago now, but it was looking at the glucose receptors within the small intestine for someone who was doing like basically keto and then trying to use carbs on race day. And it was like, not going to happen. Right. Cause they didn't
They're like, "Wait, what
upregulate
do
the
we do with
receptors.
these?"
Yeah.
Food 4 is like,
So, yeah, it's
We
wild.
just send them along. That's
Yeah.
what it is. We
Right.
don't absorb
Don't do
anything.
that.
We just,
Yeah.
that
See you
doesn't.
later.
yeah. Wait till you poop in about.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been amazing. You guys, I'm sure we could have dove down so many additional rabbit holes with you, but I want to be mindful of your time. So where can people find you guys?
www.campfireendurance.com.
Awesome.
That's the website. You can find us on Instagram at Campfire_endurance. And where else can we be found, Molly? Where are some of the other? You can find me at Christopher Bagg on Instagram, and yeah.
I'm at Molly Try.
Perfect. And do you guys have your dates for your next training camps?
We do. Yeah, Bend 2023 is open. It's June 9th to the 13th. We have a early bird special that ends on Sunday. So if you are interested in coming to camp, this is the lowest price it'll be for the next year. Yeah, there's a nice little banner on the website that says "Come to camp." Yeah, it's camp is awesome. You learn a lot of like cool stuff about nutrition and stuff like that.
Amazing. Very cool. People need that help and education. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We definitely appreciate your time. And this was an awesome podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. It's
Thanks,
really,
you guys.
really fun.